Alex Eala included in 2026 Australian Open main draw amid SEA Games campaign. Alex Eala will have a busy start in 2026. Eala officially earned a spot in the 2026 Australian Open Women's Singles main draw, marking another major milestone in her young professional career. The 20-year-old Filipina, now ranked world number 52, made the cutoff for direct entry as the Grand Slam released its initial roster of 105 qualified players. Her ranking places her inside the elite group of women who will compete in Melbourne, joining the sport's biggest names, led by world number 1 Aryna Sabalenka, Iga Swiatek, Coco Gauff, and several top 10 mainstays. The tournament will run from January 12th to February 1st, 2026. Despite the slight ranking dip, Eala's earlier surge, highlighted by deep runs at the Miami Open and her title triumph in Guadalajara, proved enough to secure her place in the year's first Grand Slam. Eala's entry comes at a time when she is representing the Philippines in the 33rd Southeast Asian Games in Thailand, where she also served as one of the country's flag bearers during the opening ceremony. Eala anchors the Philippine women's tennis team, competing in Nonthaburi, with the women's singles draw set to begin on December 13th. Also read, Philippine tennis body hopes flag bearer Alex Eala inspires Team Philippines in SEA Games. Beyond the SEA Games, the Filipina tennis is expected to stay active on Asian soil. As she prepares for the Australian Open, she is also scheduled to compete in the WTA 125 Philippine Women's Open, set for January 26th to 31st, 2026. Rising in two worlds, Alex Eala's unexpected two-front campaign at the 2026 Australian Open and SEA Games. When the announcement finally came, an innocuous email stamped with the blue and white crest of Tennis Australia, it arrived while Alex Eala was lacing up her sneakers in the humid locker room of the Puerto Indoor Stadium. The 33rd Southeast Asian Games were barely in their second day. Manila journalists were still unpacking camera gear, and Eala had just begun to settle into the familiar rhythm of multi-sport chaos. Athletes everywhere, the buzz of teams hustling across hallways, and that unmistakable, delicious scent of chalk, sweat, and ambition. She didn't expect that email. The notification blinked on her screen with the subject, AO 2026 Main Draw Entry Confirmation. It was short, straightforward, technically routine, and yet the world seemed to still for several seconds. She stared, blinked, read it again. A smile flickered. Then she caught herself. SEA Games gold medalists weren't supposed to grin like wide-eyed juniors receiving good news from Santa Claus. But sometimes history feels like a miracle disguised as paperwork. Alex Terana, a teammate, called from outside. Coming, she said, slipping her phone into her bag. But the truth was this. Nothing about her week, her month, her year would ever be the same again. The intersection of paths. Participation in two major tournaments is nothing new in the world of professional tennis, but the 2026 Australian Open and the ongoing SEA Games, happening barely days apart, framed a unique logistical impossibility. One event demanded unwavering precision on plexecution courts under the furnace-like Melbourne summer. The other required patriotic ferocity before Southeast Asian eyes. No Filipino tennis player had ever faced a challenge in quite this way. Eala, by then 21, had been hovering in the mid-80s of the WTA rankings, her power forehand and evolving mental toughness earning her respect from players and pundits alike. The tennis world knew her as the girl who trained at the Rafa Nadal Academy, who collected junior Grand Slam titles like postcards, who carried the Philippine flag into rarely charted territory. Some saw her as Southeast Asia's brightest tennis hope. Others saw her as the future of Asian tennis. Nobody, least of all Alex, expected she would land a main draw berth in the first Grand Slam of 2026 without having to pass through the brutal gauntlet of qualifiers. But the cutoff line had been generous, and several last-minute withdrawals had nudged her upward, as though fate itself wanted a Filipino in Melbourne. In 1 week, she would be switching from the roar of Manila crowds chanting penis, penis, to the global glare of Rod Laver Arena. 2 worlds, 2 missions, 1 athlete. 2. What it means to be chosen twice. The minutes after the email felt like the first step into a threshold between dreams. She walked out of the Filipino locker room into the blistering late afternoon sun of Vietnam, host of the 2026 SEA Games, and the world around her seemed to pulse in sharper colors. On the practice courts nearby, a group of Thai fans waved flags while cheering Patron Kanki during his warm-up. A Malaysian sprinter sped down the training track. Cyclists from Singapore zipped by in a blur. Everywhere, athletes in national colors trained, laughed, ate, and carried the hopes of millions on their shoulders. And somewhere in that tapestry of motion, Eala's phone buzzed again. A message from her mother. "Proud of you, Anik. Focus on SEA Games now. Melbourne will wait." Eala exhaled. There was grounding in those words. The SEA Games was not a casual engagement for her. It carried cultural weight, emotional resonance, and national pride in a way no Grand Slam could replicate. Representing the Philippines meant speaking a language older than tennis rankings. It meant honoring her country's history of underdogs. It meant being a symbol of possibility. And yet the Australian Open represented something else, an affirmation that her career had truly entered the global stage. She could not turn her back on either. She would need to conquer both. 3. The calm before the double storm. The next morning, Manila journalists picked up the story first. Headlines multiplied faster than she could read them. Eala gets direct Australian Open entry. Pinay tennis ace to juggle SEA Games and Slam debut. History beckons. Eala's Melbourne main draw breakthrough. Cameras followed her step for step through the athlete's village, and interviewers bombarded her between practice sessions. One bold reporter shouted, "Alex, how will you prepare for Melbourne while competing here?" She stopped, water bottle in hand. "One point at a time," she replied. "One flag at a time." The quote made the evening news, not because she intended it to, but because it sounded like the mantra of someone standing on the edge of two incredible journeys. Behind the scenes, her coaching team worked through complicated timetables. The Australian Open's first round was scheduled just days after the SEA Games tennis finals. Flights had to be secured, practice slots negotiated, recovery strategies devised, time zones studied like enemies. There was barely room for margin, barely room for fear. But Eala trained as though the world had suddenly doubled its expectations of her, and she had decided to exceed both.